Remember when Apple really took care of their customers, when buying their product meant a complete end-to-end experience without worrying about having the right cable, adapter, or charging brick? When I bought my first iPod in 2005, I remember being surprised by how much stuff it came with, like headphones with optional soft foam covers to prevent them from making your ears sore during longer listening sessions. It was also less slippery material than the plastic, keeping the earbuds securely in place. Plus, the covers prevented clogging, which helped the headphones last longer. Then there was this plastic adapter. Apple included it in case you owned their iPod dock. Different adapters could be switched out so that every model was cradled perfectly. And that meant if you bought a new iPod, you didn't have to buy a new dock. The plastic adapter could also be used in Apple's iPod Hi-Fi sound system, a product that already included every single iPod dock adapter in existence at the time. Then there was the charging cable and a protective sleeve. I actually didn't even buy a case for my iPod because the sleeve was enough to prevent scratches while in my book bag or pocket. Now today you may be impressed by all these included accessories, but back then it was actually a disappointment. Just look at this 2005 review that says, quote, "Inside the box you'll find the iPod itself and an unfortunate lack of accessories." That's because the previous 4th gen model didn't just include a dock adapter, but the dock itself, plus a remote for quickly controlling volume and music playback. But these extras weren't limited to the iPod. The iMac included a remote that attached magnetically so you wouldn't lose it. The MacBook included an extension cord in case the standard 2-meter power cable wasn't long enough. And the original iPhone came with a cleaning cloth, a charging dock, a power adapter, and a pair of headphones, none of which are included with the iPhone today. In fact, the only thing you will get is a charging cable, and buying all those accessories we used to get for free would cost you an extra $100. So why does it seem like Apple doesn't take care of their customers anymore? Well, the short answer is because they don't have to. Today, Apple's the biggest tech company in the world, but that's only been the case for about 14 years. For the other 35 years of their existence, Apple was considered a fairly small computer company selling niche products. Just compare the iPhone's 65% US market share today with the Mac's 7% market share in the 2000s. Apple has risen to such a dominant position in the tech industry that they can start making anti-consumer decisions that 20 years ago would have been unthinkable. Like, for example, only including a power cable with a $1,000 phone, a trend that spread throughout the smartphone industry but began with Apple in 2020. At that time, they'd accumulated 138 million US iPhone users, which was 40% of the entire American population, and over 1 billion users worldwide, which meant 1 in every 8 people on Earth had an iPhone. Now, this level of success was great for Apple, but it created a problem they'd never had before: finding new customers. In 2015, sales of iPhone had peaked around 233 million units, and in the following 3 years, Apple failed to reach that level of volume a second time. It was clear to everyone that after a decade of sales, iPhone had achieved market saturation. But Apple was still under pressure from shareholders to increase revenue every year. So if they couldn't sell a higher number of iPhones, they'd have to sell them at a higher price. That's why, in 2018, Apple announced they'd stop reporting the number of units sold, claiming it was, quote, less relevant to the company's overall performance, and that the focus would shift to revenue. And remember, in 2018 was when the iPhone X was being sold, the first model to have a $1,000 starting price, which was 30% more than the most expensive iPhone model the previous year. This high price was pretty shocking, and sparked all kinds of criticism online, with many predicting iPhone sales would tank, since paying that much for a phone seemed kind of crazy. But they were wrong. Apple sold about the same number of iPhones in 2018 as 2017, except the higher price iPhone X meant far more revenue, jumping almost 18% in a single year and beating the previous record set in 2015. This made one thing clear to Apple: people were going to buy iPhones no matter what, which was something that never happened with the Mac. Apple had released several high-priced computers throughout their history, like the 20th anniversary Macintosh and Power Mac G4 Cube, but they never sold well. So Apple was incentivized to keep prices down while delivering as much value as possible, which is why the Mac has never been a serious moneymaker. Just look at how stagnant its revenue has been over the past 16 years, all while the iPhone has exploded. But raising its price was only the beginning. Apple further maximized revenue by reducing costs. Remember when I told you how much stuff used to come with the original iPhone? Well, all those things not only cost Apple money to produce, but also to ship. Because more bundled accessories means a bigger box, which takes up more space on cargo planes from China. If Apple could make iPhone's box half the size, they'd cut shipping costs by 50%, which, based on numbers from Forbes, came out to about 25 cents per iPhone. Now, that may seem insignificant, but at 200 million units a year, Apple would earn an additional $50 million in pure profit just by shrinking iPhone's box. And that's exactly what they did with the iPhone 12 lineup in 2020, when they removed the headphones and power adapter. That meant if you were upgrading from an Android or older iPhone 6S, you'd likely have no headphones that work with the 12, since it didn't have a headphone jack. And the only accessory actually included for free, the charging cable, likely wouldn't work with your power adapter, since it used USB-C instead of USB-A. This amounted to a pretty frustrating user experience. Imagine buying a $1,000 smartphone only to realize you can't use the headphones and charging brick you've had for years. But Apple was okay with this inconvenience, since it forced customers to spend more money buying compatible accessories. In fact, the success of AirPods was largely due to Apple removing the headphone jack from iPhone 7. They created a problem and sold the solution. Now, I should mention that Apple did include headphone adapters with the iPhone 7, 8, and 10, but that was only 2 years worth of iPhone models. On average, users upgrade every 3 to 4 years, so many of the people who needed that adapter when buying the iPhone XS or 11 didn't receive it. Now, of course, you could buy it separately for $9, but that wasn't really the point. Comedian Bill Burr once told a story about how he kept losing his iPhone's tiny headphone adapter. Eventually, he became so frustrated that he went to an Apple store and bought 10 of them, just to make sure he'd always have one around. And that was the point. Even when those adapters were included for free, they introduced friction to the user experience. You had to keep track of it, remember to bring it with you, and if you had multiple headphones, switch the adapter between them. Apple wants you to be annoyed, since that'll motivate you to look for a more convenient solution, like, I don't know, buying wireless AirPods for $160. Now, Apple has made official statements about these issues, many of which do have some validity. In 2016, when iPhone 7's headphone jack was removed, they said it was a necessary decision to free up internal space for new features like the haptic engine. In 2017, when iPhone X had a record-breaking starting price of $1,000, they said it was necessary to offset pricier components, like the OLED panel, infrared camera system, and stainless steel frame. In 2020, they claimed to remove the iPhone's bundled accessories for environmental reasons, like reducing e-waste, carbon emissions, and mineral mining. And yes, technically all those things are true, but I don't think it's a coincidence that all those decisions also happen to make Apple more money. But their recent lack of care for customers goes beyond accessories, to the products themselves. Take the Mac, for example. There was a time when virtually every model had some level of internal accessibility. My MacBook from 2008 had a backplate that could be opened without any tools. Inside, I could replace the hard drive and the battery. Using a Phillips head screwdriver, I could remove the rest of the backplate and upgrade the RAM modules. This was beneficial to users for a couple reasons. First, we could swap out a drained battery with a fully charged spare instead of finding a place to plug in and charge while on the go. And when the battery became completely degraded, we could put a new one in ourselves, instead of making a Genius Bar appointment or sending in the whole computer to Apple. Today, MacBook batteries are glued to the top case assembly, which means you'd have to pay Apple anywhere from $160 to $250 to replace it, compared to the $129 it cost for a MacBook battery in 2008. But that was Apple's price. Since the battery, hard drive, and RAM were user replaceable, we could buy those components from other manufacturers, who sold them for a fraction of the price. I actually paid about $30 for a new MacBook battery in 2011. Today, nothing is user replaceable, so we're forced to pay Apple's criminally inflated RAM and storage prices at the time of purchase. Now, you might be tempted to assume Steve Jobs would have never let this happen, or that there was some change in Apple's philosophy when Tim Cook became CEO. But if we're being honest, this has been Apple's game plan all along. In 2010, Jobs wrote an email to employees that said Apple needed to, quote, tie all our products together so we further lock customers into our ecosystem. And that is the key. The more Apple products and services we use, the less likely we are to switch platforms, which gives Apple the opportunity to implement anti-consumer practices to generate additional revenue. Now, if all this talk is making you consider leaving Apple's ecosystem, it's worth taking a hard look at the alternatives, because competitors like Samsung and Google are trying to do virtually the same thing, creating their own hardware ecosystem with their own services to gain the same advantages as Apple. Today, we're in a dilemma where, if we want the most optimized user experience possible, all our products and services kind of have to come from the same company. Apple was the first to do it, and they're still the best at it, so we're forced to deal with their corporate greed in exchange for a seamless and reliable tech experience. This is Greg with Apple Explained. Thanks for watching till the end, and I'll see you in the next video.